Keith, are you ready?
Yes. Shall I start or what? Can
Yes,
you hear me?
Nancy. Yeah, yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, good. Okay, so it's time for me to say something. Um, I'm Keith Akers, and I've written a bunch of books, and I want to tell you a little about does Christspiracy give us prospects for a new worldwide spirituality? Okay, the quick answer is yes. But it's complicated and there's a lot of things that we need to keep in mind. Several things we need to keep in mind are, first of all, this is not going to be clean and easy, and it's going to involve a lot of working with a lot of people that may not see exactly the same as we do, or even as I do. And I can already tell that there's a lot of different things going on right now within the movement and within climate healers and everywhere else. So there you go. So I want to talk a little about my personal journey first. Do have something in common with Cameron Waters, and that is that we were both raised in a Southern Baptist church, and I remained in that church for some time, even after I left home. But basically, I sort of dropped out at some point. One thing that happened on the way is that I became vegetarian, and then shortly thereafter, vegan. I became a vegetarian in 1978 and then became vegan in 1980. And then I started writing a bunch of books because my mom asked me, says, are there any good books on vegetarianism? And so I mentioned a couple, and she took a look at them and says, I don't think very much of these, I mean, they're okay, but, they're not really what I would want to. So finally, I took a look at it. I said, yeah, actually, Mom, you're right. I could do a better job than that. So I wrote a vegetarian source book. Then, of course, John Robbins comes along later and writes Diet for a New America. And now we've got, a zillion cookbooks and a zillion books on veganism and vegetarianism of all sorts. But that's basically how I got started, was looking for a solution to the problem of how or whether we can politely or ethically kill an animal, and I finally concluded no. And I read a few words of animal liberation. I think it's chapter 3 about factory farming. I looked at it and I said, "That's it. I've got to go vegetarian." And eventually, I'm going to have to go vegan, but I'm going to give myself a while to sort of acclimate to vegetarianism because I had been going back and forth. I became vegetarian, then I would quit. Then I would go on, then I'd go off. So I did this for many years, about 4 years actually, from the first time I thought, well, let's try vegetarianism to the time where I said, yeah, I've got to be vegetarian. And then 2.5 years later, 2.25 years, sometime later, a little over 2 years later, I became vegan as well. And I've been vegan ever since. And so one of the questions which I tackled was, what does Christianity say about vegetarianism? And when I looked at the evidence, my first impact, and my first impression, and you have to realize this was in 1979, 1980 when I first started sort of actively investigating this. I said, no, Christianity is actually anti-vegetarian. This isn't going to work. And basically, what I did was I looked at the letters of Paul, and I saw, eat whatever is offered in the meat market without asking any questions of conscience. I said, what? And then went on from there. And so I said, yeah, this is not going to work. And so I actually started out when I wrote first did my writing on Christianity. I started out with the assumption that I was going to say, Christianity is incompatible with vegetarianism, and here's why. But then I came across a book by Hans Joachim Schirps, who's a German Jew and a theologian as well, a student of religion, I should say, not necessarily a theologian. And he wrote this book called Jewish Christianity, Factional Disputes in the Early Church. And I found out from that there were early Christian groups that were vegetarian and against animal sacrifice. And it went on from there. And eventually I wrote a couple of books. Okay, I know you've just said, we don't want to self-promote, but I'm going to do this anyway. Okay, Lost Religion of Jesus. You've probably seen this or heard of it. Simple Living and Nonviolence in Early Christianity, which came out in 2000. And then in 2013, this is directly relevant to my topic, is this book, Disciples, How Jewish Christianity Shaped Jesus and Shattered the Church. And I want to begin, first of all, by slightly apologizing for the term Jewish Christianity. The Jewish Christians did not think of themselves as Jewish Christians. They thought of themselves as either Nazarenes or Ebionites. And which one they saw themselves as depends on who you look at and what period you're looking at. At the very beginning, I think the movement was known as Nazarenes. And that probably, this is my speculation. Some of this is hard data, and I'm going to try to distinguish between what we know for a fact and what basically it's my sort of suggestions or speculations. And this is a slight speculation. That is that they call themselves as Nazarenes up until the destruction of the temple in the year 70. Now, to give you a timeline, Jesus died in probably about the year 30. There's some dispute about this, but not much. It's probably about the year 30. Year 70, Jerusalem is captured by the Romans. The Jews rose up in revolt against Rome in the year 66. And this was a very bloody revolt. A lot of people got killed. Josephus says there were millions of people killed, which in ancient times, that's a lot of people because you got to kill them one by one. You can't just drop a bomb or something. So that's a lot of violence. And Josephus, who wrote about 20 years after the event, said this is one of the greatest events of world history. And for him, of course, as a Jew, it was. And this was also a very important event in Christianity as well, although it's not obvious at first because there's no really reference to the destruction of Jerusalem in our sources. I mean, we know that it happened because obviously it's part of history. Josephus writes about it. But from Christians themselves, there's not much about it. And so this is sort of a problem when you look at the history of Christianity and try to unravel, well, what were all these people doing? So you've already seen the movie, so you already know that about Jesus basically was against animal sacrifice. That's what got him killed. Animal sacrifice business was a big business in ancient Jerusalem. It's what drove the ancient economy of Jerusalem. It was so Jesus was not just saying, oh, we need to be nice to animals. I mean, he was saying that, but more, he was attacking the whole economic infrastructure of Jerusalem and Palestine at this time, which was centered around the temple. This is how they essentially made a living from all the animals that were brought to be sacrificed. And there's some other things, though, that many people are not aware of. And one is, and some of them were alluded to in the film, but not really concentrated on. And one of these, most important one, is that there were a lot of disputes in the early church over the question of vegetarianism and animal sacrifice. There's a lot of stuff we don't really know fully about ancient Christianity. The first problem is that the Gospels were written after the destruction of the temple. They were continually edited into the 2nd century and beyond. So the Gospels are not really 100% reliable. I'm not a literalist, by the way. I'm not a biblical literalist. I was raised as a Southern Baptist, but basically right now, I don't really fit into Christianity at all. I've essentially become one of the church alumni, and currently I'm hanging out with the Buddhists. I'm hanging out with Plum Village Buddhism. But I still love Jesus, and I consider myself a follower of the religion of Jesus. But still, somehow I'm studying the Dharma with Plum Village Buddhism, and there's a basic reason for this because I think that Plum Village Buddhism better embodies primitive Christianity than most of modern Christianity. And I can get into more of that. I'm going to say a bunch of sort of maybe startling or controversial things. Ask me questions, and we can talk about it at the end. I'm going to try to leave some time at the end questions. But essentially, that's where I am personally. I've been to a lot of different churches. I studied with different Buddhist traditions. I studied in Japanese Zen, which is slightly different from Plum Village. There's Plum Village Buddhism is more like Vietnamese, and then Japanese Zen is from Japan, obviously, and then there also Vipassana. I've also early on when I was looking into Buddhism, we sat with some Vipassana Buddhists, and in the meantime, I've looked at various other religions around the thing. But I sort of settled into Plum Village Buddhism because that's actually better expresses what primitive Christianity was about, in my view, than most of modern Christianity. And so I salute those who are trying to reform Christianity, but I just don't quite know where to fit in. I think that a number of people are trying to do this. I think that the people at Carol Saunders and Lisa Levinson, they're all doing good work. I wish them luck. Maybe I'll wind up going to church with them sometime. But and somebody commented and says Plum Village promotes veganism, while most Buddhists don't. They're soft on the promotion. But Thich Nhat Hanh, who's sort of the founder, because he was exiled from Vietnam. He was an opponent of the war in Vietnam, and he was Vietnamese. But they threw him out. The communists wouldn't let him back in. So he was in exile for like 40 years or so, for a long time. And so he went to Plum Village in France. And that's where the doctrine started to spread to people in the West. So it's sort of like the Dalai Lama in one respect, is that the Dalai Lama, in 1940, if you had asked somebody, about the Dalai Lama, they would have said, Dalai who? The Tibetan Buddhism was basically unknown before the Dalai Lama was exiled. And so here we are. And we're trying to make sense of what's going on. So let's start with the dispute in the church. And the Gospels are sort of, we're not 100% certain of everything. In fact, the Jesus Seminar, the group of scholars who's come through to look at where we're going to look at the Gospels, we're going to find out what's historical and what's not. And they found out that these scholars basically reached the consensus that most of the stuff in the Gospels is not really true. It's either very uncertain. There's some things which we can say about Jesus. Jesus probably was nonviolent. The three things that all scholars, Christian or non-Christian, agree on is Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there was an incident in the temple right before his death. And he went in and he did something. And it upset the authorities. And as a consequence, point number three is he was crucified. That's what everybody agrees on. And this is already taking us quite far. But that's actually, we can't go that much further on purely historical grounds. After that, you're trying to say, well, what was the message of Jesus? Well, I think we can make sense of it. It's simple living and nonviolence. That's the basis of primitive Christianity. And that's what Christianity ideally should be today. But, well, it's not totally like that. In fact, there's some churches where they promote militarism and they promote pig roasts and meat eating. And so it's totally unchristian in my view. But I'm not going to make any further criticism. I'm just going to point out this is not necessarily what James and Jesus had in mind. But the Gospels are a little suspect. The one thing that's not suspect is the letters of Paul. The letters of Paul are some of the most solid information we have about early Christianity. The letters of Paul were written probably maybe in the 40s or the 50s. And this was a time when people who still knew Jesus were alive. And Paul was talking to them. But Paul has his own slant on things. And so we sort of have, I, as a person, as a student of history, sort of have a love-hate relationship with Paul, because on the one hand, I don't really like his theology. I mean, come on, slaves, obey your masters. I mean, where's this coming from? But on the other hand, Paul is a great source of historical information because he is there. He was an actual participant in the events that he describes. And what does he describe? He describes a dispute in the early church over vegetarianism and animal sacrifice. And some of this was already alluded to. This is from Romans 14. As for the man who is weak in faith, welcome him, but not for disputes over opinions. One believes he may eat anything, while the weak man eats only vegetables. So we're to welcome the people who are weak in faith, but they only eat vegetables. Let not him who eats despise him who abstains, and let not him who abstains pass judgment on him who eats. And it goes on and on like that. Let us do not, for the sake of food, destroy the work of God. Everything is indeed clean, but it is wrong for anyone to make others fall by what he eats. It is right not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything that makes your brother stumble. That makes your brother stumble. And that last phrase, you see the whole problem. Paul is talking not just to like pagan vegetarians or something like that. He's talking to other Christian vegetarians. Not only is he talking to other Christian vegetarians, he's talking to other Christian vegetarians who think that vegetarianism should be required. Otherwise, the question of whether we should abstain or not doesn't even come up. We could say if Jesus ate meat, there would be a very simple solution for Paul. Paul would say, well, Jesus himself ate meat, so we don't have, I mean, you can either do it or not. But apparently it's a bone of contention in the early church. It's a big problem in the early church. And we know also from other sources that James, the brother of Jesus, was a vegetarian. In fact, Hegesippus says that James was holy from his birth. That is, not only was he vegetarian, but he was raised as a vegetarian. And I think that, in fact, probably the whole movement at that point was vegetarian, going back a couple of generations. Now we know that John the Baptist also was a vegetarian. There's a dispute about insects here, which I can get into if anybody cares. But basically, everybody seems to agree that, with the possible exception of the occasional insect, that John the Baptist was a vegetarian. In fact, Josephus, the Slavonic translation of Josephus, explicitly says he ate only those things which grew of themselves, plants. Basically, he only ate plant foods. And James, the brother of Jesus, also was a vegetarian and was raised as a vegetarian. So what does that make Jesus' parents? James and Jesus were brothers, and so that means the parents of Jesus must be vegetarian as well, and have taught their kids to be vegetarian. So there's strong prima facie argument that Jesus was a vegetarian, even before we get into the more nebulous issues of what he was doing in the temple. There's some other things that we might want to keep in mind about the ancient world. That is that dairy products and eggs were not real big commercial items in the ancient world because of refrigeration. You couldn't really, there's no real easy way to preserve milk or eggs. And so there wasn't much of a market. There's probably some people would go over and buy some eggs or something, but I mean, it wasn't a big operation. Whereas meat eating, you could transport the animal to the market wherever it needed to be slaughtered. So that was more of a consideration. The other thing is that almost everyone in the ancient world was vegan most of the time, or ate vegan, shall we say, ate vegan most of the time because they had no choice. If you ate meat, you were in the 1% of ancient Roman society. And so then when we see another thing that Paul says, let's see where, I can quote it. Not Matthew, 1 Corinthians 10:25. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market, without raising questions of conscience. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience. Well, there's two things. The first thing is obvious and something that we as vegetarians would immediately notice, and that is he's allowing it's okay to eat meat. What is this nonsense? But the other thing to notice, which maybe escaped the attention of agile-minded vegans, is that he's addressing the 1% of ancient Roman society. He's talking to somebody that's able to go into the meat market and get meat. So he's talking to the rich. He's talking to the rich. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes I like to talk to people who are rich. But the point is that he's trying to take the message out into the world, and he's looking at it from a practical point of view. So I don't think that Paul really has an ideological interest in promoting meat consumption or anything like that. I think he just, in fact, he says, if it offends my brother, I will never eat meat again. So he probably was vegetarian. But the point is, he wanted an open, quote, tolerant movement that allowed meat eaters in, because he wanted to appeal to the upper class, because he saw that's how we're going to promote Christianity. And that he probably was right on that point, because when Christianity started to spread in the Roman Empire, it's through the upper class. It's because it started to appeal to the upper class in ancient Rome. And so it took a couple of centuries, but basically that's how we get to the point where eventually Christianity is the religion of the empire. So those are two things which you should keep in mind. Now, I know that some people, let me see, can I share a screen? Let's try. Let's see. Let's try to share this. Oh yeah, here we go. So can you see that? That's the relationship between ancient groups. And this is taken from my book, Disciples. This is a fairly busy kind of diagram, but I just wanted to show you the diversity within people. Most of the groups in this below about John the Baptist could have claimed to be Christian in some sense, but most of them are also followers of John the Baptist. Jesus himself was part of John's movement at the beginning. He was baptized by John the Baptist, and then it goes on from there. Then you have a split between Paul and James. That's because of the controversy in the early church. Who were the vegetarians that Paul was complaining about? That was probably James, Peter, and John. Those are the people in the early church that were trying to promote vegetarianism, and were getting rather upset with Paul because he was not. He was not promoting the message, the message of abstinence from animals, and specifically from meat sacrificed to animals. The other reason I would say, so this is just to show you the diversity in the early movement. Now I know that Jane Unchained and other people have complained about we're always arguing with each other. We can't agree, and I think there are two schools of thought on it. One is that it's basically sort of a good thing, and that it's a sort of a bad thing. And it's both. It's a problem. So I think that we do need diversity in the movement. I'd like to see a lot of different viewpoints. So everybody thinks alike, talks alike, and acts alike. It begins to sound like a cult. Well, we're not a cult, that's for sure. So, but we don't want it to get taken to absurd lengths. So anyway, so that shows you some of the diversity movement. That's what we're dealing with from a historical point of view. So, okay, now what about this spiritual movement that we're trying to start? And what does it have to do with animal sacrifice? What is this? What is all this stuff about animal sacrifice? Well, animal sacrifice is the main way that poor people get to eat meat. And Jesus was talking to the poor. The Ebionites, which was what the movement was called after approximately the year 70, at least the mainstream Jewish Christians. I see a question here. Does that make sense, Keith? If at least one of the main messages of Jesus was the necessity of ending sacrifice for us. And Paul is trying to spread the message of the opposite message. It's okay to sacrifice. Right. Yeah. Paul thinks that I'm not sure if everybody can read the message there, but she's asking, says, aren't Paul and Jesus advocating different things? Yes, they're advocating very different things. This was a big dispute in the early church, and the church split. The church split, and this split was never healed. It just ended because eventually, the group that follows James, the brother of Jesus, who basically, in my humble opinion, expressed original Christianity, that group died out. Paul's message won out, and one of the main reasons it won out because of the suppression, the vicious, brutal suppression of the Jewish revolt in the year 70. Okay, if you are an Ebionite, a Jewish Christian, as we call them, although they didn't think of themselves as that, then this was a devastating blow to the Jewish part of the people that still sort of thought of themselves as Jews, which included James. They were following the law of Moses as interpreted by Jesus. That's how they saw it. But anyway, they saw themselves as the true followers of Jesus, but they essentially lost out to Paul because the Gentile, there were already Jewish and Gentile Christian churches at this point. The people that Paul preached to were more the Gentile groups. Gentile Christianity was virtually untouched by the revolt against Rome. They suffered essentially nothing. I mean, they heard the news, they knew the reports, blah, 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 but that was it. And from Jewish Christianity, had to suffer with all the rest of the Jews who had to deal with the catastrophe that befell ancient Israel at that time. So Paul was writing before this. He said the world is going to end. Paul thinks that the world is going to end, and that's why he's not particularly concerned about whether they're eating meat or not. He just wants the message to spread somehow so that as many people will be saved as possible. He thinks he's going to live to see the day that Jesus appears in the clouds somewhere and the last judgment happens. So that's sort of the situation at the time. And the common people, they were vegans most of the time. They were going to get the only time they were going to get meat is when you either sacrifice the animal to Zeus or sacrifice it in the temple at the Passover. Otherwise, you wouldn't really get meat. That was the only, quote, temptation. So there wasn't any regular consumption of meat in the ancient world, except among the rich at this point. So now, so where does this animal sacrifice, where does it come from? Let's see if I could go back to, I want to share. Let's go. Okay. Let's go to this. Here's the screen. Now, can you see that? That's ancient extinctions. Now, if you go back far enough, all human ancestors were vegetarian or almost completely vegetarian, maybe except for the occasional termite. So if you go back to Australopithecus, which is like maybe 3 million, 7 million years ago, or something like that, which is a direct ancestor of human, then you see that, yes, we're vegetarians except for the occasional cut mark, occasional termite. And because of cut marks, which you see on animal bones, we also know that they ate meat, but it was very occasional, and it was due to scavenging. Around 100,000 years ago, things start to change. And one of these ways we know this is because of large animal extinctions. Whenever humans enter an area, large animal extinctions follow. So this graph is the percent survival of large mammal species. And you can see that there's the point where humans enter the continent. And this happens repeatedly over and over again. And up until, in fact, even it happens over and over again. Now, what this means is that when humans were hunting. They were somehow at some point they transitioned essentially from like scavenging. Somehow they figured out with using communication and spears and planning, they figured out how to hunt animals that were larger than they were. And so around 100,000 years ago, they started, the large animal species started dying out. And as you look at, for example, North America. Now, North and South America are sort of atypical. Africa only suffered about 20 or 30% of large mammal extinctions. And a large mammal is basically something that's bigger than 100 pounds or so. But you can see that in this case, that the large animals went extinct about 20 to 30% in Africa, about 30, 40% or so in Asia and Europe, and about 80% in Australia. Australia lost almost all of its large mammal species at that time. And North and South America lost about 70, 75% or so. Mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, an American version of the horse, an American version of the camel, saber-toothed tigers, all of these mammals went extinct. All these mammals went extinct almost certainly because of human overhunting. So that's a problem. And that's why ancient humans, prehistoric humans beginning about 100,000 years, were not vegetarians. They were almost certainly, this is the only way I can make sense of understanding the ancient record, is because they were hunting these animals, and we have other evidence as well. We have spears were found in the skeletons of mastodons and so forth and so on, and so we know that they were being hunted. And now, in the case of saber-toothed tigers, it probably wasn't because we were hunting saber-toothed tigers. It's because we were hunting the same things the saber-toothed tigers were hunting, only because we had communication skills and spears and stuff like that. We were able to do a lot better job. Well, eventually, about 10,000 years ago, we started to run out of things to kill. So this is our first environmental lesson here, is that while we can use violence, and this was at the time a very good strategy for humans because it unlocked a huge store of food, which was heretofore unavailable to any other species, But suddenly we figured out how to hunt them and to eat them. But eventually, this stopped being quite so profitable, and so we had. So then, what do we do? We're going to start it. We're going to hunt rabbits. That's one alternative. We could hunt rabbits. It's much easier to hunt large animals than small animals. The small animals don't yield a lot of meat, and they don't. And they're harder to find. It's easier to find an elephant than it is to find a squirrel. So for these reasons, we turned to agriculture, ran out of things. And from a point of view of evolution, this was a huge evolutionary step forward. It actually was better than hunting and gathering. Because then our population exploded. We're about maybe 3 million, 6 million, 10,000 years ago. All the large animals, or a lot of the large animal species, were gone. But then humans exploded in population to 100, 1,000 times greater than we were than just 10,000 years ago. So this is also the time at which war originated, because the same thing that makes humans dangerous to large animals, the fact that we can work together in groups, we've got spears now, all these kinds of things. This is something, all these kinds of things not only make you dangerous to other animals, it makes you dangerous to other humans as well. And so then you have the origin of war. And if you go back in time, you can see that there's a lot of violence in prehistory. In fact, Steven Pinker, who wrote the book, The Better Angels of better angels of our nature, he writes a book about this. And he says, we're making great progress because look at how violent we were in our prehistory. And now we've made a lot of progress. And that even in the 20th century, in which we saw a great deal of violence, it was still more peaceful than it was in prehistory because people were just killing each other constantly, and there's nothing you could rely on. So, in this situation, the larger the group, the more secure you were. And so we started to evolve socially. And one way we evolve socially is to stop relying on hunting animals for food. The other way is to band together in groups that we can defend ourselves. And so then we have then you have sort of the evolution of societies. And at first, it's very violent too. Now, Pinker has a number of things wrong, but I don't want to get into a diatribe about Steven Pinker, but he's right on the basic point that prehistory was very violent. Now, not so much so. So we are evolving. And so what kind of feelings did this prompt in people? Now I want to share another screen. Let's go back. Share the screen, except I'm going to go backwards here. Here we go. Okay, well, what's going to happen is that you are going to feel we are not natural meat eaters. We're not natural meat eaters. And so, in fact, one of the basic points of vegan propaganda is that if you love animals called pets, why do you eat animals called dinner? And we sort of throw that up as a slogan. Maybe this will get through their heads and make them want to stop eating animals. But this is a serious issue in psychology now, and it's called the meat paradox. Many people wish to avoid harming animals, yet most people also consume meat. This theoretical meat paradox is a form of cognitive dissonance and has grave negative consequences for animal welfare and the environment. Yet, despite these consequences, and then the article goes on to describe the various literature, and it's actually a very good review, and it gives you references to all kinds of different sources. So I recommend this, and the references, I could give you the references later. It's in my book if you're interested. But anyway, the point is, this is a serious problem. This is not just vegans trying to think of some weird argument to convince the meat eaters. This is a real psychological thing, which Melanie Joy has written about, which other people have written about as well. And now psychologists are beginning to study it. So I think that we are naturally inclined not to want to harm animals because there's just a natural human revulsion against that. And that's an important point in our favor, but it's also a problem because whenever you raise the subject, the cognitive dissonance is going to kick in because you're going to be faced with the fact that all your friends eat meat. You ate meat for a long time, or at least for those who are not raised as vegetarians or vegans. And most of society says it's okay. We've got this continual stream of propaganda that says you got to get your protein, you got to eat meat, and so it's a problem. It's a problem, and so people people try to make sense of this as best we can. We've got the truth on our side, but we also have a very powerful enemy. But this enemy, I think, is also weak in several ways. Now, this results in all kinds of economic problems, of which we already know. For example, climate change. Let me show you. It's time for another screen share here. Let's share this. Move forward a few pages. Okay, now this is mammal biomass 100,000 years ago. This is before we really got the idea of hunting animals to extinction. Now, this is all hominid species. We're talking about carbon biomass here, by the way. And this is from Václav Smil's data. You see the little black dot in the right-hand corner there, that represents all hominid species 100,000 years ago. All other mammals were the overwhelming majority. We were probably less than 1% of all the total carbon biomass of mammals 100,000 years ago. Now we flash forward to 1900, and you can see that, well, things have certainly changed. The wild mammals have drastically shrunk. Their percentage and their absolute numbers has drastically shrunk. Humans are now very populous, and then all the life, the gray cubes represent the carbon biomass, 1 megaton of carbon biomass for all our livestock. And then we flash forward again to the year 2000, and you can see this. Now, this is stuff that Sailesh and the others have already covered, but I just wanted to refresh your memory so that now we are the overwhelming preponderance of all carbon biomass of large animals on the planet. So it's no wonder you have extinctions. I mean, there's no other place for animals to go. And this shows the same thing. This is a graphical. This actually uses wet biomass. This is not carbon biomass. This is Anthony Barnosky. And you can see that for the past 100,000 years, we've been about 200 billion kilograms or less of total biomass, not just carbon, total biomass, until about the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And then suddenly, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, things explode. Humans and their livestock, the total carbon biomass is now over 1,400 kilograms of 1,400 kilograms of 1,400 billion kilograms of biomass. So it's hugely exploded. And so where are all the poor wild animals going to go? So when we talk about animal liberation, let's see, this is another thing. When we talk about animal liberation, we usually think in terms of domestic animals, because that's where most of the suffering is occurring. And that makes sense to a certain extent. But we have to realize the historical antecedents of industrial livestock agriculture, which was what we were in, namely that we were in such a small minority of the total animal biomass on the planet. And now there's almost nothing except humans and their cows and their other associated livestock. There's no wonder. And this has implications for everything. It's like, because of there's all this increase in biomass of human beings, their livestock. What are all these human beings and their livestock doing? They're breathing out carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. And what are they eating? They're eating plant matter. And all the plant matter in turn is plant matter is actually declining. It's declining by about half since humans have started agriculture. And so we've decreased the plant matter, and that's what absorbs all the CO2. That's the ultimate way that we're going to draw CO2 out of the atmosphere. That's easier than these mechanical methods of carbon sequestration, which are never going to work. But the natural carbon sequestration, proven over millennia to work, is how you're going to do it. And so we've destroyed the mechanism of photosynthesis, which takes CO2 out of the air, but we've also increased the amount of carbon dioxide emitted by animals into the air. So what's wrong with this picture? Well, that's why we get Goodland and Nanhang. That's why Sailesh is so excited about animal agriculture. It's not the only it's not the only source of greenhouse gas emissions, but it's important. We've still got carbon dioxide from coal. So if we keep burning coal and overpopulating the planet and consuming, then it won't matter. We could go vegan and that would help, but that's not going to solve the problem. So I could go on and on about the environmental stuff, but I want to sort of wrap it up here and bring us back to my main focus, which is on what does this have to do with the spiritual connection? To really solve this problem, we have to understand something. We have to alter humans' basic value systems. in the beginning of the axial age, now that the about the year 800 BCE to 200 BCE, this was the classic axial age. And this is when all these thinkers like Pythagoras, like Confucius, like Lao Tzu, like the Buddha, like the Hebrew prophets, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, all of these people arose at roughly the same time, and it had a radical transformation on the ethical basis of society and on the social basis of society also, because this is when you have large empires arise and in which violence actually starts to come down substantially. So it's not just, as Steven Pinker seems to think, that just we developed agriculture and violence stopped. No, it wasn't until the axial age that our violent prehistory suddenly started to come under control, because then you have ideas about equality, about compassion, about honesty, all these basic moral codes like do not kill, and things like that, which are present in all the religions to a greater or lesser extent, got started at this point. This is what we need, except that we need to extend it to all of nature. We've just taken these axial age principles that do not lie, do not kill, do not steal, do not commit sexual immorality, and so forth. All of these things, which are found in some form in all the major religions that started about this time, found in Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, but it's not applied to the earth, and it's not applied to other living things. So we have to have respect for not only animals, but also for plants, minerals, etc., because it's all one thing. It's all one thing. The minerals that are in the earth, they may not be able to think for themselves, but they are part of our environment. They are an expression of the earth, which is essentially at this point a living thing, but it's a living thing under great stress. So we have to somehow take a new morality out into the world that extends to all these things. And it's not just in veganism either. We have to, let me make one final screen share here. Share, and now I have to go forward. This is land subsidence. I can talk about that. Here's what I wanted you to see. This is a graph. This shows where carbon emissions are come from. The total lifestyle consumption emissions. It's 50% of all the emissions are just the richest 10%. That translation, that's mostly like the United States, the rich countries and the rich people in every country. That's where the problem is. A lot of the problem is right there, and we have to address that as well. And we have to take care of the poorest. And because of soil erosion, there are other problems which I could get into. Because of soil erosion, soil is eroding 10 to 20 times faster than the natural rate of soil formation. This is not sustainable. Even if everybody on the planet was vegan, it wouldn't be sustainable. Soil erosion and groundwater depletion. The green revolution depends on irrigation and it depends on energy. And we're depleting our supplies of water. You can already see that there's some communities in Arizona that are already can't get water. There's a suburb of Scottsdale that has to truck in their water because they've run out of water. The Colorado River in the west goes dry now by the time it gets to the ocean. So we've already hit the limits to growth. We've already hit the limits to growth of Western agriculture that depends on the Colorado River. And yet people are still moving to the area. It's like, go figure. I don't know what they're planning to do, build a huge pipeline and desalinate the water and pump it in from the Pacific Ocean. I don't know. But I mean, it's just totally ludicrous. We face a different problem than just climate change. We face a problem of limits to economic growth. We've totally overrun the planet in terms of biodiversity and in terms of other ways. We need a smaller economy. That means we need simple living and nonviolence on a massive scale. And so that's the kind of spiritual revolution that we are looking for. And it does not say that there aren't political ramifications of this, but we have to keep track of both the spiritual aspects and the political and economic aspects and the technical aspects as well. I don't think that renewables are going to save us. I think that we've got to simply accept that we need a smaller economy. So I hope that we can work together, certainly for a vegan world, and certainly for a more spiritually oriented world based on a new morality. So with that, I will conclude. And if anybody has any questions, BJ, I don't know how do you want to feel these, but I think we've got time for a few questions.
Yes, that's wonderful. We do have some time. And I guess I will start off with my question. Do you think current seminaries and people that you've talked to understand about the Ebionites and the Nazarenes and that they were vegetarian?
No. I think that's the quick answer. I could be surprised because I sort of stopped keeping track of all the debates over early Christian history about the time that about 2013 or 2014, and since then I've been working more on environmental issues. So I'm not totally current, but my impression is no. I think there's some work that needs to be done, but I think that I think that there are some people which I had some contact with who are aware of these issues and might be able to get it into sort of a more theological sort of thing. And from there, it might radiate out into the church.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there any other questions? And I don't see any in the chat, but
yeah, a couple of people raised their hands. Now, how do you want to handle this, BJ? You want to just unmute them and
let's put Dr. Rao on there because I can't see
Shankar?
The hands right now.
Shankar, go ahead.
Yes, I can unmute. I can come on. I can't come on a video. I don't know. I tried.
Okay,
it's not letting, but I can just ask the question. It's okay.
We can hear you, Shankar.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, I can now. Thank you. Hello, Keith. Actually, I enjoyed in the movie, like when you were explaining, it was a good connection, relation, everything was amazing with the sequence, the Christspiracy. And thanks for the explanation, especially for the chart down that kind of gave a reference to go back and look later or this thing. I want to know how there is actually a part of some of my Ethiopian friends I came to know because they said, yeah, we are vegan because they offered me food and I said, is it vegan? Yeah, it's vegan. Of course, we do fasting. So, and then I said but we still follow Orthodox form of Christianity, which is which before you even went to Rome, we are following that version. And then we do follow these vegan habits there. They kind of selective days in the year they select and they go vegan, like they don't even take dairy, and people who follow the strict fasting. And do you know anything in relation to that or any connection?
Okay, so I'm not quite getting the question here. It's about the Daniel fast? What?
No, not exactly the Daniel fast. There is a name for it. Right now I forgot how you call it as this thing. Proper some Ethiopian word. Yeah.
Now that's something that I actually I was aware of it, but then but I think this would probably appeal to the more evangelical crowd. So that might be a way. So I'm not going to insist that everybody has to believe that Jesus was a vegetarian. If you want to say, well, it's the Daniel fast, then I'll say, close enough, as long as you're vegan. And there are books that are written. I think I would mention, what is it? Is God a Vegetarian by Richard Young. It's sort of old, but it would be a good book for an evangelical type fundamentalist person who wants, nevertheless, to be vegetarian and looking for some good, and doesn't think that Jesus was a vegetarian. Then that would be one way to approach it. So I'm not going to insist. I think that Jesus was a vegetarian, but whatever, as long as we get there, I don't care.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Nancy?
Yeah, thank you so much, Keith. I just wanted to let you know that my very dearest friend, Michael Berensweg, who died. Yeah, you remember him.
Yeah, I remember him. Yes.
He likes to talk on the phone a lot, and
Yeah, I know.
he read all your books and recommended all of them, just all of them. So I have that background, and also meeting you at the vegan Johnstown festival,
The
sitting there,
Summerfest, yeah.
Summerfest. Okay, so two quick questions. One is, have you read Joseph Atwill's Caesar's Messiah, the Roman Conspiracy to Invent Jesus? So that's Caesar's Messiah, the Roman Conspiracy to Invent Jesus.
I've
I
heard of it.
recommend it, yeah, for everybody, because it does really, this is a Christian who didn't want to see what he was seeing when he read the Old Testament, the New Testament, the War on the Jews, and the History of the Jews, the latter two by Josephus. Okay, so I'm just put that out there. It's an amazing kind of wait a minute kind of thing. And number two, oh, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I think there was such a person as the historical Jesus.
Okay, he thinks it was
And that
Lazarus.
Paul discusses him, and that the Ebionites discuss him. But other than that, I can't comment in detail because I haven't read the book.
Okay, okay.
Second question.
Oh, yeah, Caesar's Messiah. Recommended just to give this amazing perspective. And then the other one is the person who was in the film with you, Jim Mason. He
Yes,
wrote the
yes.
book, right? An Unnatural Order.
Yes.
The roots of our domination and destruction of nature and each other.
Yes.
And I appreciate his why men went out to hunt in terms of going too far north, no vegetation, and then the whole thing about the male-female relationships and why misothery, that's his word. I recommend that book also, besides yours. Just in terms of it wasn't just that they invented spears and worked together, but because if we're herbivores, it's not natural to like drool over like a cow or a sheep.
Yeah. I've read Jim Mason. I agree with most of his stuff. The only main difference is that I take it much further back. I take it. Didn't start with the domestication of animals. It goes back to 100,000 years ago. And
he does too.
A lot of it, where it's not natural to hunt, but if you are a primitive society, then another primitive society arises that knows how to hunt, they're going to outcompete you. They're going to drive you out of business because basically this is a huge source of calories, and it's much hunting would have never succeeded. I think the ratio is about 10-1 is what they've estimated of primitive hunter gatherers. So it's not natural. It's an economic thing. It's not like let's go out and kill something kind of thing. I think that it became associated with masculinity, but I don't think it is intrinsic to masculinity. So that's the quick. I could go into more detail, but I see we're running out of time.
Maybe we could go into this further some other time.
Yeah. Talk to me. Do you know how to get?
In
Talk
touch
to me.
with you?
I'm on the internet. Find me.
Okay. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nancy. Dr. Clapper, did you have something to say?
Yes. Hi, Keith. It's really good to see you, and Sailesh as well. What an honor to take part in this, or just to witness this wonderful weekend event. And it's about time, the truth got told in such a direct, powerful way, and you are all coming at it in very important viewpoints. Keith, it must have been back in 1982. I think I had just come into the vegan movement and looking for some type of sanity and validation. And your book, the Vegetarian Source Book, found its way into my hands, and I was so relieved to see such a scholarly work, such a calm presentation of these very powerful truths. And it just personified who you have been all these decades. And here you are, almost 4 or 5 decades later, still saying this very powerful truth. And I just want to thank you and acknowledge you for your scholarship and your love and your concern and your presence. You've been a real beacon for me over the years. And so just want to acknowledge you for that. And to let the messages we've heard today on that remarkable film and your scholarly discourse and everyone's viewpoint. The time is late. There's no other choice than to become vegan. And I'm going to get a T-shirt made up. Eat plants and get on with it. Already. This is basically what it comes down to at this point. But do it with love, and love will find a way, and the truth will find a way. So again, good to see you all. Thank you for this wonderful event, and know that I'm an ally in arms here, hoping to help things along. Be well.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dr. Clapper. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Keith, very much for your contribution.